kids. Howdy and welcome to the December edition of Conscious Embodiment, Astrology, and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. It is, in fact, December, the last month of the year. And yes, the old adage applies. It went by so fast. But that experience of time accelerating is just feels like more than just a trope. Because this year felt astonishingly fast. And if December were plucked out of 2025 and put into a random year sometime before 2020, it would be a very reasonable month. There's not a lot going on. There's the typical, lunations. Mercury turns around and does his little wrap up. So it's just it's a regular month, air quotes, but it's 2025 and there's no such thing as that. And the only thing we're going to talk about today is the full moon on Thursday. And believe me, that is big enough to not only, fill the podcast, but it's worth it for the story we're in of consciousness shifting. And from that perspective, December is wildly powerful. So in order to tell the story of this week's narrative, I'm starting back at the new moon in Libra on October 21st. This whole 2 lunar cycles that we're in and the one that started on October 21st is a total Persephone goes to the underworld story. So that lunar cycle was the Persephone one. Ruled by Venus, both the new moon and the full moon ruled by Venus because the sun changed signs after the new moon and moved into Taurus. So the second, lunation of the series had the moon in Venus's other ruling sign. So back to the new moon on the 21st. Simultaneous to the grand water trine, slipping into place in October, that new moon had like an exact yod, which is a navigating mechanism, and everybody wants one in their natal chart because they're kind of cool. When they occur, it signals a moment when the small choices that we make, like setting intentions in a new moon ceremony, will take you to very different territory down the line. And when I say down the line, I'm not talking about now. I'm talking about like 100 miles down the line. Using my freeway exit analogy with a yod, when it's operating, you're just exiting the freeway. You might not even know where you're going. You just know that I don't want to go this way anymore. I got to get the fuck off the freeway and see where we go. In this way, this is maybe overstating it, but I'm considering everything about how 2026 is going to feel for each of us as individuals will have a lot to do with the work and the circumstances that did some of the work for us that started back at that new moon. Now, the yod that I just talked about has Uranus in the one position of the in conjunct to the new moon and Neptune in the other, both at 0 degrees fire and air signs. Now, you know that Saturn and Neptune are hanging out all year long, but Saturn has already dipped back into Pisces at that new moon. So the teacher wasn't in the yod anymore, even though technically he was because of, he's close by. But in terms of like him being back in Pisces, he was connecting once again to the grand water trine that was already in place before that new moon, but by Saturn dipping back into Pisces before the new moon, the teacher, the lessons, the structure that our new moon intentions can offer us is solid. It's stable. It's got Saturn saying, build it. Just build it on top of a foundation that's firm that you can measure and meet. And Jupiter over there in his favorite place to be, Cancer, saying you can have anything you want and you can have it delivered. And then his trine with Saturn says, well, they both saying, but you got to build it. You know, you're not getting it for free. So you now have the whole backdrop set up for the 2 lunar cycles, because the juicy juice is in the Scorpio corner of the grand water trine that I just described, that has Saturn and Jupiter in an ongoing trine that allows us to have equal access to responsibility and expansion, both. Scorpio transforms. Scorpio is ruled by Pluto. In the Persephone story, that's Hades, right? That's the underworld. And the Scorpio archetype is ruled by Pluto, who's off creating, like, you know, the age of Aquarius for us. But everything that happens in Scorpio's corner of the grand water trine has Pluto's capacity to kill and have reborn, well, everything, because all of the personal planets are going to move through Scorpio at one point or another. And at that new moon, it was Mars and Mercury exactly conjunct at 20 degrees of Scorpio. Mercury was not retrograde quite yet. So mind and body, walk and talk, were right there in the sort of death chamber with Black Moon Lilith 2 degrees away saying, remember the shame that you've been trying to pretend isn't in your voice or in your decisions, where walk and talk is still capitulating to unexplored shadow. So the transformation of walk and talk set up by that new moon can be utter, but man, you're going to have to face some pretty deep shadows in the Black Moon Lilith way. And that means things that previously you wished you could keep down in the basement, but you can't any longer. So 2 weeks later, we roll into the next Venus-ruled lunation. And I think it's so kind of elegant that, you know, Venus's rulership being split into Libra and Taurus is A, interesting, and B, double interesting because they're both activated. And that can only happen because we're in a territory where the sun is changing signs after every new moon. And the opportunity in that is to kind of bleed through both solar consciousnesses so that we start out with our awareness in the Libra sensibility of Venus's rulership, which is partnership, mirrored consciousness, coming back to balance, stasis, and forgiveness will give you love. And then the conscious awareness shifts into Pluto's territory of death and rebirth. And now the message is still Venus ruled because the moon was in Taurus at 13 degrees in this full moon on November 5th. So while it's still about more love, it's Taurus's version of that, which is about sensuality and pleasure and the delight of being in a body that says, dive in, have fun. It's a little muddy, but I think you're going to like it. And that's the Taurus-Venus connection, you know, which allows us to feel love in the sensuality of being here. So we get both versions of love in a lunar cycle that can transform us, but not just our heart centers because of Venus. By the time we get to that full moon on November 5th, the sun at 13 Scorpio is not really activating the grand trine, but he's gonna, right? He's just a few degrees away, which means like a week later, he's in the right place to activate Jupiter in Cancer and Saturn and Neptune in Pisces. Black Moon Lilith has pulled in to being in now almost an exact trine, 1 degree later, an exact trine with where Jupiter and Saturn are at. So the opportunity there is that whatever release might have been, you know, available for you in your journey as you move from October into November, it was Pluto directed, even if it was Venus ruled, because that's just good language for the sun directs it, but the moon does the cut of the work. But perhaps the kind of yummiest thing about that full moon is Neptune had moved back into Pisces by that time. So in fiery Aries at the top of the lunar cycle, then our sort of great spirit energy said, you know what? We're not quite ready to burn the house down yet. If we did, we'd probably blow the whole thing up. Aries war. Let's go learn a little bit more about compassion, forgiveness, helping our fellow man. So I love Neptune coming back into Pisces during this grand water trine thingy because Neptune increases the flow, the possibility, and for those on a spiritual path that doesn't include hating some people to keep your spiritual connection true. Neptune coming back into Pisces is yummy for all of us who are on a path of we're making the changes in the world we need to so that we can create the true age of Aquarius, which requires us to care for all. This is why I'm not ultimately worried about the United States, though I do think that the process through that's going to be scary as fuck. But still, powerful, beautiful Neptune moving back into Pisces for this. And that full moon, I remember, it was a whopper. 2 weeks later, now we're in Pluto's territory. It's easy to perceive Pluto and the underworld as like the punishment place. It's where we keep all of our hidden demons and the things that we don't want the world to see. It's also where our power is kept until we work through our own limits and feelings like we are not powerful. But it's right there the minute we're, ready to embrace that we're the powerful one in the room. Then I think about religious paths that say that underworld is, where Satan is, where the awful things that are happening on the world that we have to kill off in the form of progressive values. But that's not what it is in astrology. That's what it is in a polarized, America and the whole world at this moment. But in astrology, we're in the purity of a holistic reflection, right? I don't think there are any Christian astrologers. But if there were, they'd be talking about Christ rising more powerfully with Neptune moving back into Pisces. What we know about Neptune moving back into Pisces is that all roads lead to God, and all of us get deeper access to that. And the underworld doesn't mean we have to be ashamed of that which is hidden there. That's what Venus and Taurus in the full moon is teaching us, or was. That we don't have to be ashamed of our own poopy smell, and that when we love ourselves, including that which we've been trying to hide from the world, we find that we become more of who we really are, and then all of those disowned parts make us more powerful out there in the world. That's what that full moon was about, full stop. Now, if I were a pop astrologer, I would have said, everybody's going to heal every wound you've ever had, and Venus is going to bring you your soulmate. Not going to happen. But I will say this, to the extent that you are ready for, promised to, and allowing to die and be transformed will be so in this full moon. It might not be your time for a deep release. So it may not be like, oh, you're avoiding it. It's just not, this might not be your full moon. It was mine because of other connections. On the other side of the continuum would be people who were in so much pain that they were weeping with long lost griefs. And social media told me that story because I'm telling you, every day during November, people were saying, I can't stop crying. I can't stop crying. I've been crying for 3 days. Oh, yes, honey, up and down my TikTok. TikTok audience is very engageable, right? So I know what's going on with the zeitgeist on TikTok. TikTok allows me to hear from people on the periphery where they're interested in astrology and they'll hear what I'm saying and then they will see, well, the other people typing, I've been crying for 3 days, and then I know a little bit more about what's going on out there. So when we get to the new moon ruled by Scorpio, we're in a completely different paradigm for the lunar cycle that we are in that began in the third week of November with that Scorpio new moon. Well, now the corner of the Grand Water Trine means business, because that new moon at 28 Scorpio had sun and moon, obviously, at 28, Mercury retrograde exactly at 28. And I love precision. I'm practically getting aroused just talking about the angles here. Black Moon Lilith, 1.5 degrees away at 26. That's a very close orb to the action. So this new moon that we're just coming out of, that we're about to dip into the full moon of, had the capacity to reach so fucking deep inside people's psyche and shame and deep, frightening places, because Black Moon Lilith literally is the doorway, right? If Pluto's the underworld, Black Moon Lilith is the trap door that leads in and out, right? Where she tries to push unconscious material through, but you shove it down saying, no way, no way. But they're both connected to the underworld. And in Scorpio, Black Moon Lilith has all of her, marching orders from Pluto. So the earnestness about what needs to die becomes literal in this new moon cycle. And Mercury's retrograde says it might be a while before we really get what's sort of unfolding inside of us. So keep that in mind about this full moon, that we're not quite done with the revelations that may come, but trust me, some very powerful revelations or sudden insights might be coming your way over the next few months. Of course, Jupiter is still over in his exalted place in Cancer. Only by this new moon, he's retrograde. So Jupiter, the planet of manifestation, in a sign he loves to be in, a very generous place, if you will, by virtue of him being retrograde, it means that our expansions are an inside job for a couple of months. And this new moon signals the value of that. It's a new moon, right? So we got to put our desires and intentions into it. And I'm telling you, Mercury is going to make it a later delivery. And the planet of manifestation being retrograde might also make the expansions that we're creating in the underworld show up later into 2026. But trust me, that new moon changed your consciousness. But wait, there's more. Because Neptune has moved back into Pisces and is therefore available for a water trine that's direct, he's only at 29 degrees, 29 minutes at the moment of that new moon. But the new moon was at 28. More arousal for this astrologer, because that's a very tight trine. It's a 1 degree orb. So that means that the intentions that we set as we moved into this lunar cycle were caught by not only Saturn in Pisces saying, I will help you build the structure you need. And again, in the hidden places where there is no apparent structure, so we might have to wait. There's all these reasons why the promise of this lunar cycle may take months and months to layer out what it brought us because of all of these retrogrades. But the precision of 28 degrees to 29 amplifies what's available energetically, just like someone turning the volume up in the inspired, spiritually driven change and transformation that's, means you're going to have to die to be reborn. What's also special about that new moon is that Venus was now in Scorpio. So our emotional body by that time was in turmoil and turbulence and deep capacity to love. The challenge with Venus and Scorpio is that I love you to death becomes literal. Not really, but it's like if you have Venus and Scorpio in your birth chart, you're going to love very, very intensely. So cosmically, Venus in Scorpio is participating in the trine now in earnest. And at 16 degrees of Scorpio, Venus was making an easy opposition, trining the North Node. That was an imprint grabbed by the new moon, ruled by Pluto, of our heart centers being willing and open for more changes, right, at the level of death, rebirth, which means painful possibly, but that they usher us towards where we're going next, the next chapter, and the next chapter that the collective is going, through. This is that moment that sort of makes me want to remind everybody that ever since the North Node moved into Pisces and we faced coming into 2025, I've been saying, put your spiritual practice first or you're not going to survive. And we're out of the hot summer, but next year is going to be way more challenging. And so remember that as you're thinking about the full moon this week, that late November's new moon also had the ability to help us remove some fear about what the outside world is like, what the story it's telling us, and to just come back to our own individual sense of purpose and heart-centered living and, connecting to bigger picture energies so that you're not so personally traumatized by the very traumatizing outside landscape. And wait, there's even more. One last thing about that wild new moon. I was saying that new moon felt like a full moon because that's how intense that passage was. And that's what I said about it because that's what it felt like full moon sick overwhelm of energy that I sometimes get, not always in every full moon, never at the new moon. But I had it in spades at this new moon because of all of this energy. And then Uranus, having moved back into Taurus, Venus's ruled sign, was exactly opposite the new moon in Scorpio. So that's like the lightning flash that changes everything. So I've just been taking you guys through a very long story that I'll wrap up in a moment when we talk about the full moon. But Uranus's placement in this story says everything might change by the time we get to the full moon or the next new moon because Uranus switches things up in conscious awareness in such sudden dynamics. And while I don't remember what exactly was going on the world landscape those couple of days, but I'll be willing to bet it was pretty flippin' intense. The full moon in Gemini hits on Thursday. It's exact around 3:14 p.m. Pacific time. It's the first Thursday of the month. I love when global healing meditation lands on a lunation because it's just more energetically intense. I hope not to be moonsick that day because that'll make it a harder afternoon. But please tune in this Thursday on Zoom to join me where I talk all about the entire month of December. So the value of sun signs changing during a lunar cycle is we get to integrate more than one consciousness at the same time, which is just sophisticated. It's advanced work, if you will. Befuddling energetically if you're just swimming in unconsciousness, but We would describe such periods in our lunar cycles as moments where each lunar cycle has more to offer us because more than one area of consciousness is being engaged. So we started in the Pluto consciousness of death and rebirth being necessary in order to grow what we desire. And the intensity of that full moon was, as I just got done describing, 12 out of 10, epic. But the movement of the sun into Sagittarius is a completely different landscape in terms of what we are aware of. Scorpio wants us to die so that we can be reborn. But what's the sign that comes next? It's Jupiter-ruled Sagittarius. Talk about joyful. Jupiter is all about expansion. Sagittarius, as the ruling sign, the archer, is so delighted to know the truth, seek the truth, learn more, expand more, put your arrows into everything. And if you go back to the order of the zodiac connecting to, the seasonality in Europe, Scorpio is when we're very aware we're moving towards the dark and the death of the year. And it's like the archetypal journey said, and in the dark, just as we're about to die, let's celebrate. Let's find the joy within. That's the beauty of going from Scorpio to Sagittarius, and our consciousness has already done this as part of the journey from the new moon 2 weeks behind us to the full moon on Thursday. So you can see the sort of resurrection consciousness that's in this lunar cycle. In Scorpio, we are resurrected. In Sagittarius, but we know more. We are wiser. We have learned a thing or two. We've taken the ultimate of hero journeys, which is the journey to death. You know how much I love my death stuff. It's like I say, we practicing our death with every breath and with every sleep and with every, hero's journey. So I love this lunar cycle for reflecting that and the ability to then have valuable consciousness shifts because we were willing to face the darkest shames that we are carrying around. Mercury and Venus will both be in Sagittarius. Their presence in Sagittarius means that their consciousness has resurrected. So Venus first, that's Persephone returning to the top side, but now she knows who she is. She knows that she's the queen of the underworld. See, she didn't know that before Hades. She just knew to capitulate to her mother's wishes, which is clearly to keep things bright and sunny and spring-like. And then Hades says, this ain't fucking working. Takes her, looks like an abduction, but down there in the Scorpio mansion, she becomes queen, which then we do in the Sagittarius mansion, and Venus in Sagittarius has done that. Mars did this way before Venus, right? So first our body climbed up out of the deep end of the pool and is in the kind of expansive, let's move around the world in a more conscious way. And guess where Mercury is? Having been through a retrograde, he is at the full moon on Thursday. He'll be at 22 degrees of Scorpio. That means he's right at the top of, or I guess the bottom of, depending how you would describe this, of Mercury's activation of the Grand Water Trine. So I love this because the bigger challenge in life is what we're perceiving, right? For the sake of this point, we're just going to say that love is easy, which we know it's not. But the perception really is harder to change because it ain't us. Our perceptions aren't organic to who we are in our being. So the mechanism of our perception isn't quite in our changeable consciousness in the same way that our feeling nature is. So the next 2 weeks, which leads us right up to the next new moon, Mercury will be traveling through the rest of Scorpio. Right? He's moving slow because he's still in his cycle. He's moving forward, but he's not moving at his typical speed. So we have 2 full weeks before the next new moon. And in the next 2 weeks, starting on Thursday, we will begin receiving the first layers of data about what's going on in our unconscious that Mercury is ready to reveal. Right? The other retrogrades, etc., will do the layering in that I've also talked about. But the Mercury movement is key in the next 2 weeks because the full moon is ruled by Mercury. So if the sun is in Sagittarius and the moon is in Gemini, one of Mercury's signs, the essence of that full moon in a vacuum would be we're consciously aware of higher levels of perception, Sag, and we let go of our polarity consciousness, our debates about what is right and true, our struggles with decision making that comes through, chaos and monkey mind. Any of the challenging energetics of thinking causing suffering can be released in a Gemini full moon so that Scorpio Mercury is receiving disposition from this full moon that says, let it go, drop some shit. And the fact that Mercury is in Scorpio is the perfect sign for him to be in, to receive the marching orders of drop some low-level thinking so you're not quite as a victim of your own mind and perceptions. And then just let the next 2 weeks play out and just know that, well, thank God Mercury's not retrograde anymore, but we are certainly going to be experiencing some level of mercurial things that I'm very curious about. So rather than pretend I know what they're going to be, I just invite you to be also curious about what you're thinking, what conversations rise up organically from this full moon on, because that's how you'll know what has shifted, in fact, in your unconscious spaces. Have at it.
Did you know that Michael has a daily astro alert? If you enjoy hearing the weekly astrology, you might like knowing more about each day. When you subscribe for the daily astro alerts, you'll get an in-depth explanation of the day's astrology sent right to your email. Subscriptions are only $10 a month, or you can purchase the yearly subscription at the reduced price of $100. To subscribe, head over to michaellennox.com.
So today I'm not going to answer a question, and we have no dream segment because we have a guest. This is the first guest we've had in a very, very long time. And, I don't have guests anymore. We did some in the very early days on the fifth Mondays. But once I ran through some of my beloveds who were doing beautiful work in the world, I wasn't moved to become an interviewer. And then so people reach out and they're like, hey, have my client on. She's great. I'm like, but I don't know her. So why would I? Why? I mean, it may sound, I don't know, a little petulant, but my voice is about astrology and dreams. And so I'm not going to have somebody on the podcast that doesn't fit that narrative. And I don't remember what came up about progressed charts and things I didn't know, but Zoe, you were the one who suggested that I find somebody who knew more than I did.
Yeah.
I'm sure you don't remember why, do you?
Well, I think it was just people had questions about it, and you are like, I don't personally use it, but this is a thing. And so I just thought it'd be because there are questions. So
yeah, there were. And no, I do use progress. It's one of the juiciest parts. But there's a holes in my knowledge because I'm more self-taught than elder taught. Never read a book on astrology, not one. So progressions in astrology, I have talked a lot about, which hence would have brought some questions because it's astrology, but it's not organic. It doesn't follow the solar system, but it's an incredibly powerful tool. And so after you suggested that, I took that on and I went in to a Facebook group and I said, hey, anybody consider themselves an expert in progressions? And this wonderful woman reached out that I felt immediately drawn to, Ella Yve. We set up a little Zoom meet like months ago, and then I completely forgot about it because I can't remember anything. And somehow we got reconnected a bit ago, and it seemed like the time to talk about both the journey of someone else and their, path to becoming a healing presence through astrology, who knows a little bit more about progressed, nuanced interpretations than I do. Ella works with astrology, but I'm not surprised, as happens a lot, that if I'm attracted to someone else who's doing similar, like astrology work in the world, chances are they're going to have a very different approach than I, and it's going to be a feminine, soft approach. And that's who I'm drawn to have conversations like this. So I thought she was the perfect person to bring on to the pod. And so let's talk to Ella. So, Ella Yve, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Michael, for having me here. I so am grateful to be invited into this space.
Listen, I love doing interviews, and when we started like 228 episodes ago, I was doing interviews on like the fifth Monday of every month. If there were 5 Mondays, I did an interview instead of like, a dream. But I only was tapping into like people who were dear to me, who were doing beautiful work. And once I passed through those intimate folks, I'm like, yeah, I'm done. And so I get asked a lot, and the answer is like, no, I don't want to interview a stranger. And you're a stranger. But as I said in the intro, I am dying to know from your perspective, like everything you have to offer in the 25 minutes that we can sort of spend together about the specific thing about progressions. But listen, I want to start with this. My first question is, how was the family of origin and the wounded spaces a perfect setup for the healing presence that you've become?
Well, when I hear wound, I think of Chiron. And if I'm, this is an astrological conversation. So just transparently, my Chiron is in Aries in the 5th house. So, for me, it's been a lifelong journey of learning to have more fun.
Yeah, fun,
and
joy.
Fun, joy, 5th house matters, finding my sense of identity through exploration, through curiosity, through all things 5th house, Leo. I just have a little cat that just came into my life, little Chester, and it's funny that you're framing it this way because watching him play and be is so healing for me because he's just organically just
right. He is that.
He is that.
Yes, he is that.
He embodies all of the things that I've come. If you're talking the wound, he's my medicine. Just being able to watch his play is my medicine.
I don't want this whole conversation to be about our pets, but, Penelope is more than just, I got a dog, because I worked on her for a decade in my consciousness. I specifically did for a year and a half at least before the trigger date came. And so I knew I was bringing in my familiar, my perfect reflection. But I also had a fantasy about that. My fantasy was she was going to be deeply affectionate, Velcro loving and with me always, and would respond when I was sad. Ooh, not at all. I got my mother reincarnated into a dog's body, a perfect reflection of my shadow. She's dumb as rocks, which is my first shadow in the world, and superiority of intelligence was my first Chiron in the 3rd. That was my first defense. I'm smarter than you, and I will humiliate you to feel better about myself.
Yeah.
So here I am, 60-something years later, and she reflects the perfect partner, not the fantasy of I still feel the wound and you're going to lick it. because she
I get
doesn't.
it.
Not at all.
Yes. Yes.
Not at all. But she shows me what my dharma is, Cancer in the 7th, patience. Okay, so we just dove off into that, but that's okay. That was for me. And I do think a lot of my followers sort of love Penelope too in this funny little way. So where did astrology come in the journey? How did you discover it? And why did it grab you?
Gosh, so many layers and so many roads that led me to astrology. I guess my first one was after my son was born. I had another dark night of the soul. So I had postpartum depression pretty severely. This was back in 2002. And I didn't understand it. Back then, we weren't really talking about hormones. We weren't really talking about, just different physiological things that happens when you give birth. And so I said, I need to heal from this because I don't want to be this type of mother. I don't want to have these feelings, these thoughts, these sorrows. So I said, gosh darn it, if I'm going to be here, I'm going to be happy. And so I just happened to look down. Yeah. Like if I'm going to stick around in this world,
right. Yeah.
I got to figure this out.
That's
because
right.
I've got a young son to raise and I was going through some really dark thoughts. And I'm like, I'm not
and
gonna leave
your
that legacy.
mastery in wisdom is ultimately joy if you can clean out the wounds that block it. You are here to know joy. I am here to step into a powerful voice that is authoritative and teacherly, but kind and compassionate.
Yeah. And so I guess with that experience, I happened to look down. I was in a vehicle at the time, and I found a Natural Awakening magazine, and I just started looking through the back of it, and I saw astrology and energy healing and Reiki, and so I kind of went down that path. And then I went into a metaphysical shop where this woman, her name was Roseanne, she was teaching astrology. And I said, well, I'm curious about it. I've always read my kind of Cosmo chart, sun sign Scorpio, what's going on for this month. But she broke it down. She goes, well, let me show you what this is about. And Michael, when I tell you that she knew things about me, and I said, wait a minute, how did you get all that? With looking at those symbols, that round wheel, what magic, what is this? What is this?
Right. And ultimately, it's a language and a structure, and it is the code that runs consciousness.
Yes. And for that time, for me, it was such an activator. It was because there was parts of me that she was able to explain that I couldn't even explain to myself at that time because I was very lost. And again, into this deep, dark, night of the soul, in the shadow. And I was lost in my shadow. So to have somebody so eloquently and with a language of neutrality show me a reflection back to myself.
Right. No shame, no blame,
Nope.
no judgment, just here's what it is, here's how you spiral out, if you choose.
Yep. These are opportunities.
Before we started recording, you had mentioned something about a pretty intense experience that was also germane to your journey that I didn't want to hear about until now. Share with me what you and Zoe were talking about when I popped in.
Sure. Well, just to get some background, I'm a Sun Scorpio, Moon Scorpio, and Mercury Scorpio.
Oh,
Sun
Jesus
in the 11th.
Christ.
And Mercury and Moon in the 12th, right? Fuck. So it's been needless to say.
Wait a minute. I'm so sorry. Hang on. Ow. Ow. And wow. What a gift when you aren't in whatever you were in with all of that intensity before you figured out. You did have to die a few times, didn't you?
And I still will. And that's
of course. Yeah.
That's, I guess, the journey of this particular incarnation, having chosen all the Scorpio, because I do believe we choose certain aspects in our chart. And I feel like I've come to redo Scorpio in a way, because with my sun being Scorpio and then my moon, I said, wait a minute, I've got a mastery here. And I obviously didn't complete something. So, and I've got the sun in the 11th house. So groups, organizations, working with other people.
Yep, that's it. Yep.
And just helping people realize, look, you could die without dying. There is a way to transform and transmute this very dense energy. I think of like an exoskeleton that's just coming off of you. And if you have these dark nights of the soul, it's because that part of you is dissolving and dying off.
And must.
Yes.
I talk about this all the time, that we do this at the level of breath, that we die with every out-breath and we are reborn with every in-breath. It goes down to the pulse of molecules that run us, and it only is saying like one thing, 1, 0, this way, that way, up, down, transforming or, pummeling.
And sometimes a little bit of both. And
Right.
And I think a lot of the times it's because we've come to it just to have this experience.
Yeah.
And so I'm recoding the way I perceive the experience. And so I had to recode how I invoke myself, which is my name. So back in 2023, because if you look at the etymology, when you say amen, it's actually, when you mix up the letters, it's name, right? So when you name yourself, it's a divine prayer. And so, I was going through, again, another dark night of the soul, and I'm here to say there's not just one. Some of us have many, 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 many layers.
Yep.
And so...
We'll attest.
And I was born with the name Carmela. I was actually named after my Italian grandmother, and it's spelled Carmella. And my middle name is Yvette. And my mom told me many times that she named me after a vehicle because she always loved Corvettes. and she imagined me growing up and having this really red, fiery Corvette and had the name licensed
Corvette. Yep.
Yvette, right? There was a part of me, again, the soul essence is like, something's transforming again. Something is dying off. And so what does that look like? I'm becoming a new persona. I had this incredible meditation after working with this herbal astrology deck that I was gifted. And I had the imagination. I could see myself dying. So it's almost like I had this OBD, right? I had this out-of-body experience. And I saw myself dying. I saw my hair around my face. I saw the ashen look around, And then in my imagination station, I saw my body going into the soil. It was like my imagination was on fast zoom, where I could see like my flesh disintegrating, right? And then I could see my bones, and my bones were crystals. It was a fluorite color, purple, green fluorite, right? And all of a sudden, I see these little microbes start polishing my crystals in my bones. And then, and again, in this imagination, this is meditation, then I could see my cellular structure, my skin regrowing around this new bone structure. And I could see this new being evolving and coming out of the soil and like being rebirthed. And I was like, oh my gosh, this was a complete rebirth process. What just happened? And I no longer resonated with Carmela because, and if you look at the etymology again, I love language. And karma is the beginning of Carmela.
That's right. Also, car. You
Vehicle.
took the car vehicle off the first name and the car vehicle off the second name so that your old Merkaba could die, transmute, and become a light machine with crystals at the core. Yeah. Beautiful.
I love that. I love that interpretation. So after that, I said, well, what's my name? Who's this new being that's emerging this time around, this cycle around? And I heard, you're just Ella. You've dropped your karma. You're Ella. And I said, well, okay. Well, what about my middle name? And then I just heard, because I'm constantly growing and I love plants. I love working with essential oils. And I just saw Ivy.
Ivy, yeah.
Right. So, and that's just how that emerged.
Okay. I'll say one last little tiny thing about myself that got sparked with what you said, and then we'll go into the astrology of why we came. I had a very recent sort of meditation dive, and one of the things that came up as I was rising out was my name, Michael.
Oh. Okay.
I am a 30th degree Leo sun conjunct Venus. Okay. So I am all Leo, all joy, all play in the 8th house of Scorpio's capacity to transmute. And my job is to be Michael incarnate without any of the elevation that my wounded self wants, to use my visibility, my charisma, and the shiny stuff to like feel better about the wound itself. And so the integration process has been spectacular, several dark nights, so that I could be Michael in front of, the world, or at least my tiny little ministry in it, and have humility and compassion as part of the name Michael, because wouldn't he have those?
Yeah. Michael on the mic.
Michael on the bike. So, progressions in astrology. Can you offer like the briefest technical description? I've described it many times, and many people who listen know exactly what they are. But for those who might not know, what's your best language?
Sure. Well, I actually, in transparency, I use ChatGPT to help me really curate a language, because I think
Fabulous. That was great.
I love metaphors. I love story. I'm learning to be more of a storyteller with astrology. And so the best way I could describe it, and we kind of co-created this, co-collabed this, very simple. Think of the progress chart. It's like your progress chart is like your internal software. So your natal chart is like the factory setting, and the progress chart is your system update. Right, because we're very Pluto and Aquarius right now, so this tends to land well for a lot of people.
Language is gonna be the way of the future.
Yeah, and then when we were moving into relocated, which is also something I like to explore, it's almost like, okay, so when you move to a new place, you have to log into a new Wi-Fi network, and that's what that tuning into the location of where you're at, because that's what's also going to. You're going to have a different speed. You're going to have different signal strength, different quality, different noise, bandwidth, based on where you're at. So the chart to me is it's a living expression. It's a very dynamic experience of what's happening internally, because we're constantly in motion. We're changing, we're evolving. And so when I look at the progress, that's the framework that I see it as. Where have I progressed to? Where have I moved? Where has my energy? Where have the planets, how are they transmitting the energy through me now based on the age and where I'm at now in my life? So,
but you maintain the birth location as primary,
yes,
and then you add whatever going on in the progress chart as nuance.
Well, yeah, like the factory setting. You get your phone, it has a factory setting. That's your natal.
Well, you taught me this in our 2-minute conversation. I have no idea why I reached out to you. It was something on the podcast that caused Zoe to suggest, hey, why don't you bring in somebody who, focuses on that? And I immediately reached out to you, and you told me this thing of, no, natal has to be the foundation. And in that chart, my current progressed rising sign is Capricorn, and had been for quite a long time. But I hadn't ever looked at that because I was doing relocated. I live in Los Angeles now. And in that progress chart, exactly when I became chronically ill, my progressed rising moved into Pisces. And the first awareness of my illness of long COVID started with the mental health impact of Great Depression that I'm now, I have taken the medication of an institutionalized human being to deal with a depression that's not mine, that's not organic to me. So I was rejecting the Capricorn rising because it didn't feel like how I was meeting the world. But then I looked at the timing of the Capricorn rising in the natal position, and it reflected a period of my life where I was indeed building structure. I'm still in that building structure. And 2 years ago, 2.5 now, the nuance came in that I also have to meet the world with no body, taking my body out of the ascendant visibility and pull it in the back and rest.
I love that interpretation. I also, it's interesting because Pisces rules pharmaceuticals, drugs.
Oh,
yeah.
That makes sense. That's right. The biggest institutions.
Yeah. And, it dissolves boundaries. So with Capricorn, it's all about boundaries. And so Pisces came to dissolve all that. And if it needed to use medicine, which, you are the medicine ultimately, but again, because it does rule things that are permeable, right? That it breaks
Yes.
it breaks the barrier.
Yes.
And it probably you had some mental constructs that just needed to be dissolved. So the Pisces there, again, I always like to ask, how is this working for me? What's right about this? What's right about this?
Crying out loud, my internal intelligence has exploded in these last 2.5 years. And I thought I was done. Like, I thought I had completed the expansion of where I get to go every day and within a few breaths. Like, I don't have to pump it up any longer. I'm there already. When I wake up, I'm already in that alignment. And yes, even in the worst of it, like when Mars retrograde was stationed for a fucking month, squaring my natal Mars for a fucking month and exact degree. That was the best, 6 months of my inner expansion of the entire 62 years so far.
How so, may I ask?
My practice is about going into a trance state and letting my body ride the wave of energy. It's very active. It's very movement oriented. Some people would understand immediately if I just say my Kundalini is not only not in the spine anymore, it's like he's a free snake that lives with me. And so when I go into these trances, I'm riding that wave. So what I mean by expansion is, it's hard to put language to this. 3 years ago, I could get to one railway station of extraordinary light and geometry. And now I'm 6 stations beyond, where I can tap into energy and light that is way beyond us and the body and Earth herself, but much more of a integrated sense of like the sun as our identity in the galactic neighborhood. So I'm perceiving us as a Gaian consciousness, and now I'm also perceiving it as a solar consciousness, both. And how I do that energetically is I get far enough away from it all that I'm like looking at it from a distance. That's a
Well,
metaphor.
it's interesting because the first house, when we talk about astrology, it's the IM, right? It's ruled by Aries. And as I'm listening to you talking about the ocean and the expansionness and being in this very fluid state, I am Pisces. You are the ocean itself.
Yes.
So you are the movement of the water.
But also grounded in structure.
And grounded in structure and Capricorn.
So that I'm
'cause
not
that's your
floating
default.
away. Yeah.
Exactly.
Golly. Oh, this is spectacular.
Isn't it fun?
All right.
I love exploring.
We got like a couple of minutes left. Is there any way to translate this conversation to value for like who's listening?
Well, anybody who's interested in astrology and who chooses to look at themselves through this particular lens, this system, I would just know that we are growing and evolving beings. And when your ascendant changes, if you move as you get older, that just means that the way you're ascending has shifted. It might have shifted elements, it might have shifted dimensions, locations, but it's all part of your evolution and it's for you. This life is happening for you. So again, it's just a different periphery to look at astrology because there's so many different, it's like a kaleidoscope, right? You can look at astrology in so many different ways. There's so many systems. But to me, it's an art form. It's like a poetry. It's just a very neutral, creative way to describe your experience of being human.
Love that. And I will add the sort of masculine side of the equation and tell you all you have to do to sort of work with your progress chart for the first time is you go to your birth date, you count the number of days that equals how many years old you are, then you look at what date that is in the calendar back when you were born, cast a chart for that day, and there's your progress chart. If I cast my birthday chart for 62 days after August 23rd, 1963, you can do the math in your head. That's my current progress chart. So all of you can find your progress chart in a couple of mathematical minutes, depending on how frustrating that exercise will be for you. Or you could contact Ella Yve for a session. I'm assuming you've got, lots of ways you connect. Why don't you tell people how they can find you?
Sure. Yeah, I'm on all the socials. I'm a budding astrologer, even though I've been immersed since really I took my first astrology class back in 2005. Again, with this transforming layers dying off, I used to actually work in hospitality for many years. So that was my training ground
11th house, yes.
on how to, navigate what I was studying through astrology. So yeah, you can find me on all the socials. I don't have a website. Well, actually I do have a website. It's Lives in Astrology. It's on iBeacons. And it's just it's a different periphery. It's a more embodied. I called it Live Zen because I think of, how do you live with these energies in a peaceful way?
Yeah.
All these dynamic currents and these different personality constructs that live within you, these, voices in your head that are your signs, your elements that are wanting a voice, wanting a conversation. It's just a gentle way to feel supported. And that you're not crazy, you're not alone. We're all going through this process. So using the language of astrology can just really help you ground it in a very unique and again, neutral way.
And if you've ever had the feeling that you were like stuck and limited by what some astrologer told you about your natal chart's difficulties, we don't stay there. We progress. And in the spirit of that, I'll say, hey, so long. Thanks for coming. This was fabulous. I really, really enjoyed this. Thanks.
Thank you for having me. And I'm so grateful for this experience.
Thank you for listening to Conscious Embodiment, Astrology and Dreams with Dr. Michael Lennox. You can find us on Apple Music, the iHeartRadio app, and anywhere you find your favorite shows. Head on over to michaellennox.com for information on astrology readings, the Daily Astro Alert subscription, upcoming classes, and to join the mailing list.